And so, hello there, and welcome back to another Night of the Movies podcast. And in these podcasts, I talk all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I'm talking about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom once again, as a film where anything goes. But before I do that, I should say what I say at the start of every podcast I do, that if you are watching this podcast on YouTube, hello there to my viewers, but heck, you just don't have enough time wherever you may be to watch the full podcast on YouTube, then you can also get podcast out audibly on Spotify and Night of the Movies on that platform. And if you are already listening on Spotify, hello there to podcast listeners, then you can also check this podcast out visually on my YouTube channel and Night of the Movies on that platform as well. Likewise, wherever you may be watching or listening to the podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the podcast, of course, and also leave me some feedback on things to improve on with future podcasts. You know, there's always things to improve on. And also, give me some suggestions of topics you want me to talk about in future podcasts. But anyway, just before I get into my redone thoughts on Temple of Doom, if you will, because I did talk about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom on a separate review video about a year ago now. But just before I get into my redone and my sort of new thoughts on Temple of Doom, I should say a couple of things as well. It's the ongoing saga of hay fever. Over the past couple of podcasts that I've done, I've said at the start of them that I have hay fever quite badly right now, and that's the truth. You know, I started saying that in my podcast on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I said it in my podcast on The Flash, and I said it in my podcast on Raiders of the Lost Ark yesterday, and I'm saying it again here. I have hay fever quite bad right now, and so if I'm sniffling throughout this podcast, I do apologise. Also, although the heat wave is pretty much ended where I live, it's not fully ended yet, though. It's almost ended, but it's not fully ended. So it's quite hot in this room whilst I'm recording this podcast right now, and sometimes the heat affects my, sometimes the heat affects my thinking as well. And also, I went swimming early today, which means that I'm quite fuzzy thinking right now. Sometimes when I go swimming, it just, I don't know, it just does something to the rest of the day where, pardon me, I can't think straight. And, I just feel really tired and really out of it. So if I'm a bit out of this podcast today, I do apologise, but I'm going to push through no matter what. So yeah, do bear all that in mind. I have hay fever, it's quite warm right now, and also I've been swimming early today, so I'm quite fuzzy thinking right now as well. And also, one thing I should mention is that this is the 50th podcast on this channel, which I'm really happy about. I mean, I'm not doing anything to celebrate this milestone, I just kind of want to point it out, it's the 50th podcast I've done, and in this podcast, as part of my 50th podcast, should I say, I'm talking about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom once again, like I did about a year ago on the YouTube channel, and I'm talking about Temple of Doom as a film where anything goes. So Temple of Doom was released in 1984 and is the quote-unquote sequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's the second Indiana Jones movie. However, I did quotation marks like that, I said quote-unquote, for this being a sequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark, because technically it's not a sequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. Technically, it's actually a prequel, because the film is set before the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders of the Lost Ark is set in 1935, whilst this film is set in 1934, which I always find weird, by the way. I don't understand why they didn't just make a direct sequel to Raiders after Raiders, if you get what I mean. Like, in many ways, Last Crusade, which is the third film in the Indiana Jones franchise, is a direct sequel to Raiders, and some people actually criticise Last Crusade for being a complete rehash of Raiders. I think they're completely wrong, but I can understand where they're coming from. But I've always found it weird, I've always found it strange that the Indiana Jones franchise kind of goes 2, 1, 3, 4, if you want to watch it chronologically. If you want to watch it in release order, you watch it, as it's been released. Raiders, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But, at the same time, if you want to watch it in chronological order and see Indy's character arc, developed throughout all 4 films, you have to start with Temple of Doom, really, because that is when you first meet this character as played by Harrison Ford. So yes, you know, just off the bat there, we're looking at something that's quite weird. And I mean, the whole film is like one big anomaly. You know, it shouldn't have really been made the way it was. Steven Spielberg, who directed this film, he returned to direct this film after directing Raiders, you know, as part of an agreement with George Lucas. Both agreed that if, you know, Raiders of the Lost Ark was successful, that Spielberg would direct all three Indiana Jones movies, would do a trilogy, and Spielberg would direct all three films. And so Spielberg returned to direct, but he was going through a breakup at the time. At least that's what I've read online. He's going through a breakup with his first wife. I don't know, he might be getting divorced as well. And he's going through quite a tough period when he was making this film. And that was the same with George Lucas as well, who came up with the story for this movie and came up with many of the characters. He's going through a divorce with his wife, who was an editor on the original Star Wars movie, by the way. I forgot the name of the editor right now. I forgot the name of the person. But he was going through a divorce with her, and you feel that in the pain of this movie. And there's all these things going on which I think very much reflect their mindsets during the making of this film. And also it's just, you watch it and I mean, it's so wildly entertaining. I love this movie, I should say. I haven't actually said that yet. I love this movie to pieces. It's my second favourite Indiana Jones movie. I actually prefer it over Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I'll go into why a bit later in this podcast. But this movie is a one of a kind. I've never seen another movie like this, and I reckon I never will. But here's the thing about Temple of Doom as well. It's got a lot of things wrong with it. Don't get me wrong, and I'm not beating around the bush with the problem that the film has. It definitely has some things wrong with it, particularly its representation of women. I don't think Willie, the main female character in this movie, is particularly interesting or compelling, and is probably the worst female character in the entirety of the Indiana Jones franchise so far. You know, I haven't seen the fifth film, so I can't say. Maybe there's a female character in that which is quite poor, but I don't know yet. All I know is from the 4 Indiana Jones movies we've had so far. Side note, I'm not saying I think Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character in Indy 5 is going to be any bad. I'm looking forward to watching that character. I don't care what most people on YouTube are saying right now. I'm looking forward to Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I don't care if it's an unpopular thing to say, I'm saying it anyway. But anyway, yes, going back onto what I was saying, I don't think Willie's an interesting character. I don't think that the film is as well made as Raiders of the Lost Ark. There are some sequences which are quite ropey, and there's some moments which don't really work that well, and it gets really dark and sometimes unnecessarily dark, and you do think in the middle that it's starting to lose its way, and also it doesn't have that same, I don't know what I'm trying to say, I suppose joy as Raiders of the Lost Ark does, but at the same time though, it's so well made and still so wildly entertaining. I love this movie because it's so in your face. You know, anything goes in this film. Quite literally, the film starts off with the musical number with Kate Capshaw as Willie singing "Anything Goes," and the film continues that trend. It starts off with a musical number, then, about 5 minutes later, there's this gangster car chase through the streets of Shanghai. Then Indy, Willie, and Shoudln't, by the way, this kid who can miraculously drive a car. I didn't really know that's a thing. Maybe it is a thing. I just don't know. Maybe that's just me being a bit stupid and a bit ignorant, but I just don't know if that's a thing or not. But Shoudln't, who is a kid who can drive a car, which is unbelievable, but still, you know, you got Indy, Willie, and Shoudln't. They all get on this plane away from Shanghai. They think they're away from these gangsters, but then the plane is being owned by these gangsters and being ran by these gangsters. Two of the pilots, you know, somehow related to the gangsters that Indy and his partners were trying to get away from. So the plane is about to crash into this mountain, but they just managed to jump out, and they managed to jump out on this safety raft dinghy sort of thing, and somehow they land unscathed. I don't understand how that works. Like, none of them get bruised, none of them have cuts on arms or anything like that, but still, they are saved by this raft, and then they go and along this river, and they get to this deserted village where all the children have been taken, and these sacred Shinakra stones, I think that's what they're called, Shinakra stones, which are the MacGuffins in this film. You know, the MacGuffin in Raiders of the Lost Ark is the Lost Ark, and the MacGuffin in Last Crusade is the Holy Grail, and the MacGuffin in King the Crystal Skull is the Crystal Skull, and in this movie it's Shinakra stones, and they've been taken, and the village needs those stones in order to survive. It's something like that, and so Indy goes to retrieve these stones, but in doing so, he comes into contact with these Tuggy warriors when he gets to Pankot Palace, and after having this weird banquet and travelling on these elephants through the jungle, he gets to Pankot Palace and he goes into the ground, and there's this Tuggy temple, this underground temple, the Temple of Doom, if you will, where he meets all these Tuggy warriors, and they're all keeping these children captive, and they have the Shinakra stones, and Indy needs to get them back. And you think he's doing it for the village, and in a way he kind of is, but also he's doing it for himself, because fortune and glory, which is quite literally a line in this film. And then as he just manages to retrieve the stones, so he gets captured by these Tuggy warriors, he gets possessed, he gets whipped. Shoudln't gets whipped, which is something, I don't think that happened in a film nowadays. And also Shoudln't becomes a slave, but then Shoudln't breaks out of being a slave and he goes to try and save Indy after Indy's about to sacrifice Willie, but just manages to save him before it's too late, and Indy becomes unpossessed. I don't know if that's a word, but you know what I mean. He becomes unpossessed and he goes to save all the slave children, and also he manages to get one of the Shinakra stones. But before that happens, there's this minecart chase through the tunnels in this temple, which I don't know how they made, by the way. It's like one big roller coaster, that whole minecart chase, and that should have been a roller coaster, some theme park somewhere, like, I don't know, Disneyland or at Paramount Land, if Paramount has a land. I'm not even sure if they do, but they should do, because they've got a lot of IP. But you get the point of making that whole minecart chase in the film should be a roller coaster, and as far as I'm aware, it's not. Then anyway, you got the whole minecart chase, and then they're on the bridge, and Indy saws the bridge in half, and he's fighting with the Mola, the villain in this film. Pardon me, he's fighting Mola on the side of this bridge, and he just manages to get one of the Shinakra stones, then gets back to his village, and all the slave children, the children that were once slaves, are reunited with their families, and one of the Shinakra stones is returned to the village, and Indy goes off with Willie. They kiss at the end, and that is the movie. It should have worked. There's so many things that you're watching and going, how did we get here? Literally, the film starts with a musical number. An hour later, someone's heart is being taken out in a temple in quite a intense sequence, quite an intense and atmospheric sequence. Someone's heart is being taken out. Then an hour later, this is a minecart chase sequence, which is thrilling to watch. But you're going, what is this movie? It's so strange. It's so weird. It's such an anomaly of a film. It shouldn't work, but it does. And you know the reason it works is all the way down to Spielberg. That is the reason this film works. This is such a Spielbergian film. And what's odd is he's completely disowned this film ever since making it. In a similar way to how he's disowned Hook, the Peter Pan film which he made in 1991 as well. He's disowned that movie, and he's disowned this movie quite a lot as well. I mean, he's still very friendly with Ke Kwan whenever he meets him nowadays, and he is married to one of the stars in this movie. He's married to Kate Capshaw, who played Willie. But other than that, he's pretty much disowned the film. Whenever he talks about Temple of Doom now, he always says that, not an ounce of my heart was in that movie. And then you watch it, and it's such a Spielberg film, though. It has that sense of adventure, which you get in so many of his films. Not only the Indiana Jones series, but also in E.T., Ready Player One, which is one of the films he made recently. You also get that in Catch Me If You Can to a degree. Minority Report, AI, Artificial Intelligence, Jurassic Park, The Lost World Jurassic Park, which he also directed, Hook, which I've also mentioned already in this podcast, Jaws, Close Encounters. Many of these films have this sense of adventure in there, and this film does as well. And also, it continues that Indiana Jones trend, much like Raiders, because it's got that sense of adventure. Raiders was one thing I didn't really talk about in my podcast a bit yesterday, although that podcast was, 45 minutes long? Just over 45 minutes, so I think I said enough about that movie, but still, one thing I didn't say about Raiders in that podcast, but it has this grand sense of adventure that is just so entertaining and thrilling and exciting to watch, and it's never really boring or slow whatsoever. No, it isn't at all. I mean, the fourth Indiana Jones film is, but that's another matter which I'll talk about when I go on to talk about that movie in a couple of days' time. But this film has this enormous sense of adventure which you just can't help but get involved in and get invested in and feel like you are a part of in a way. And that's how I feel about all of the first three Indiana Jones movies. You also feel about Last Crusade. Again, not so much about Crystal Skull, but that's another matter for another day. So that's one of the reasons I really love this movie, because you have this grand sense of adventure which I don't think would have gone if it didn't feel like a Spielberg film. And also you have a kid in a prominent role in this movie, which you get in many Spielberg films, whether it's the likes of Close Encounters, Jaws has kids in important, significant roles. Also, so does E.T. Clearly, E.T.'s all about kids, really, when you think about it. Also, Empire of the Sun, Christian Bale, you know, that was his first role, and he's really good in that film, and the film centered around him as a kid. Also, Hulk, like what he mentioned, Jurassic Park has two very important kids in it. So you get the point of making. Kids are key part of Spielberg films, and they're a key part of this movie as well. Short Round is one of my favourite characters in cinema history, to be honest. I loved that character. I wanted to be like Short Round when I was younger. I wanted to meet a 30 to 40-year-old masculine man who's a bit neurotic, and I wanted to go on an adventure with him, you know what I mean? I wanted to go on an adventure with a character like Indy, but I wanted to be Short Round. I didn't want to be Indy. I didn't want to be making all the decisions and doing all the, you know, crazy stuff and getting into very dangerous situations. I wanted to be one watching on the side, almost cheering him on and being along with the adventure. I wanted to be like Short Round growing up, and so that's one of the reasons I really love that character. And also, it feels like a Spielberg film because of the way it's held and because of his sequences, which the action sequences which he directs, which is just so good to watch, which is so thrilling. Like, I don't think all the action works in this film, and to the same degree as Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I did speak about this in my podcast, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I did say that I do think that is the best directed of all four Indiana Jones movies, even though it's not my favourite. I do think objectively it's the best made of all four Indiana Jones films, and it's probably, again, objectively the best Indiana Jones movie. But personally, I enjoy the action more in this film because it's so different. Spielberg and Lucas, when they sat down to, you know, think out this film, and when they sat down to, you know, go through the story and what could happen, and when they made this movie, they were going for something quite different. They didn't just make a rehash of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, they did it with Last Crusade as well. I almost made it sound like they did with Last Crusade. But they didn't. They really didn't. And that's one of the things I love about the Indiana Jones franchise. Even though, you know, I'm not too big on Crystal Skull, it's still a different movie than all the others. But again, that's another matter for another day. So, what I was saying was, I love the fact that this movie is so different, though. The fact that they didn't just do Nazis again. They didn't just do things which, you know, Raiders had already done. They had these different action sequences. They set it in a different country. You know, the Raiders is set, wherever it's set, I've forgotten off the top of my head, but Temple of Doom is set in India. And I love how different it is, and I love how the locations are all real. Well, they all look real. I don't know about the temple, but all the exterior locations look real, and you really feel that. And I just love how Spielberg and Lucas went for something very different in this film. And I don't think if this film was made by other filmmakers, we wouldn't have got that, though. I think this is, you know, one of the best sequels ever. I'm not gonna lie, I think it's one of my favourite sequels. I think one of the best sequels of all time. I mean, technically, I know I've already spoken about this, it's not a sequel, but if you want to class it as a sequel, you know, because it was his second release in the franchise, it is one of the best sequels of all time, in my opinion, anyway. And I do think that is down to Spielberg and Lucas, which just went for something, because they went for something so different with this film, and in doing so, still made such an entertaining, exciting, and thrill ride. And also, I love how the film is so dark, though. And, I mean, I shouldn't love this. I really shouldn't. And I sound a bit mean that I love this, but it's the truth. I do. I love the fact that Spielberg and Lucas were going through quite a rough patch when they were making this film. And you feel that. There is pain and anguish and heartbreak thrown into this film. You know, talking about heartbreak, some guy literally gets their heart taken out of them, magically taken out of them. It's not gory whatsoever, but some guy gets his heart taken out of them. There is heartbreak in this film, and also there is pain and anguish. Like I've already mentioned, Indy and Shoudln't get whipped at one stage in the film. Indy gets possessed, and I always think when Indy is getting whipped, I always think that's Spielberg. Somehow that's a personification of Spielberg. I mean, maybe there's something there, maybe there isn't, but when Indy's getting whipped, I almost feel like Spielberg is whipping himself almost. I don't know, maybe there's something there, maybe there isn't. But, yeah, there's just so much pain in this film, and you watch it and go, whoa, this is a dark movie. Like, when I watched it about a week and a half ago for about, I don't know, the 90th time, I was shocked by how dark it was. And I only... the last time I saw the movie before about a week and a half ago was about 11 months ago when I viewed it on this channel, So I was watching, I was going, I forgot how dark this movie is, because when you think of Temple of Doom, you think it's quite a fun roller coaster movie. You watch it, it gets quite dark in the middle, almost like you think it's about to lose its way, and then Spielberg goes, no, don't worry, this is an Indiana Jones movie, we're going to save it, here's John Williams' musical score, here's the Raiders March, bum-ba-dum-bum, bum-ba-dum, don't worry, I'm going to save it all, because that's what I do on Spielberg, and there's a reason I'm referred to as one of the most magical filmmakers ever. I think he is anyway. The word magic is often linked to Spielberg in some sort of way, but the film is very dark in the middle. It gets really dark. And then, at the same time, though, there's all this joy in this film, though. And there's all this magic, like I said before. And I think a lot of that is down to not only Harrison Ford's performance as Indiana Jones, which, I think he's having more fun in this film than he was in Raiders. I mean, maybe not, but that's the way I see it. And also through the character Shoudln't, which... I love that character. I wanted to be Shoudln't growing up, and also because of Spielberg's direction and the way it marries up to the John Williams musical score. Once again, the John Williams musical score in this movie is absolutely tremendous. I love his score for this film. Much like, when I was growing up, I loved Temple of Doom over Raiders. I never really loved Raiders. I almost feel the same way about the soundtracks. I've got all the soundtracks in physical form back there, somewhere over there in the background. And when I was growing up, I used to burn them onto my laptop. I used to burn the CDs, and I used to listen to them in the car. I used to listen to all the Indiana Jones scores, but I particularly used to listen to the Temple of Doom score and the Last Crusade scores. And I'll talk about the Last Crusade, I can't even speak, the Last Crusade score when I talk about Last Crusade in a future podcast. But for the Temple of Doom score, I used to listen to it so much. I was obsessed with this score. I still am. I still listen to it on Spotify nowadays. I think it's so much more, what am I trying to say there, gigantic, enormous, orchestral than the score for Raiders. Like, I think the score for Raiders is tremendous as well. I also think it's an incredible piece of music. What John Williams did that film is immense, but I also think what John Williams did with the score for Temple of Doom is immense. I don't even know if that's a word, but I think it's even better than what he did for Raiders Last Ark, because it's so over the top, and it perfectly encapsulates the film, though, because the film is all over, is completely over the top. There's all these things going on that really shouldn't work. This film shouldn't work, and the John Williams score really encapsulates that, but also it really encapsulates the joy and the thrill that you have watching this movie. I love the theme for the Slave Children. That sounds like a weird thing to say, but there's a track on the score called Slave Children's Crusade, which I think is an amazing piece of music. Just so, it perfectly encapsulates the feel of this film. Just that one piece of music. And I love how it incorporates the Raiders March into this film. I love how I didn't just use the Raiders March over and over again because it was a sequel. He does use the Raiders March. John Williams does use the Raiders March in the score for Temple of Doom, but he uses it. He doesn't overuse it. You know what I mean? He doesn't overuse it to try and bring back those memories from the first Indiana Jones movie. And also, I love the the chant that you get in the temple. Arum Shava, oh no, my God. I don't even know how it really goes off the top of my head, but I love that piece of music in the score as well. And I also love the theme for the minecart chase. I love John Williams' I love what he did with the opening Anything Goes. I love how he added his own style to that in the score. I just love the score so much. I really adore this score because even though there isn't really a quiet piece of music on the score for Temple of Doom, I love how just exciting it is to listen to, and that's how I feel about the film. Really, it shouldn't work. I've gone through the other stages of the film, all the major stages of the film, a bit earlier in this podcast, and when I was doing that I was saying this really shouldn't work, this shouldn't work, this really shouldn't all add up together, but it does, because it doesn't really stop. It just keeps going. It's so in your face. It's not like, look what's happening now, look what's happening now, look what's happening now, look what's happening now. It's so in your face, and it shouldn't work, but because it's Spielberg, and because it's Lucas, and because you got John Williams scoring, and because you got Harrison Ford back as Indy, it works. All these elements coming together. I mean, it's not just all that, because you have the Mola as well as the villain, brilliantly played by, what's his name, Amish Peru, I think that's the actor's name. I'm not pronouncing his name wrong, and I do apologise if I am. But because you've got all this going on, and you've got all these brilliantly shot action sequences which are so well staged, it works, and it's exciting, and it shouldn't do, but it really does. There are some problems with Temple of Doom, definitely, and I do think it is a bit dated now. You watch the film, and I think particularly the representation of women in the film isn't great. The representation of Willie is really not that good, and I always find it weird that Spielberg married Kate Capshaw, who played Willie, after this film. I think they married in 1991, so quite a few years after they made this film, but they've been together for a long while. And they've been married for a long while. And I always find it weird that Spielberg, he didn't marry Karen Allen, who played Marion. He didn't marry the one who played Elsa Snyder in Last Crusade. I forgot the actress' name now off the top of my head. But you get the point I'm making. He didn't marry any of the other women out of any of the Indy films. He married the one out of Temple of Doom, which I don't know what that says about him. Reading that as you will. And I know love's love and all that sort of jazz, but still, I always find it a bit weird that. And I don't think Kate Capshaw's character, Willie, is that good in this film. I was about to say I don't think Kate Capshaw is that good in this movie. No, I do think she's good, but I think she's good what she's doing. And I don't think she'd be given that much to play around with. I think that if she was perhaps playing Marion in Raiders, she would have been doing a better performance and that character would be more light. But I straight up just don't think Willie is a good character in this film. I think she is by far and away the weakest part of the movie because of the writing and because of how she doesn't really add much to the film. She just screams for most of the movie, complains about all the Indian culture that she sees at the banquet at one point. She keeps screaming in the jungle when they're travelling to Pankot Palace. She keeps screaming at the temple. And I think the best thing she does in the film is the best thing that Willie does in the movie is the opening musical sequence because, well, that's just mainly down to Spielberg's direction, and also if there is Kate Capshaw singing in the opening sequence, and I'm not sure if it is, but if it is, I do think she does a good job. But other than that, I can't really think of anything else that I really like of Willie in this film. I don't hate the character or anything, and she doesn't annoy me when I watch the movie, but at the same time though, she doesn't add much, and I wish they wrote that character better. And again, maybe that is down to what was going on between George Lucas and Spielberg. Not between them two, but what was going on in their lives separately during the production of this film. And also, I do think that some of the themes are a bit dated. This whole white savior stuff in the film with Indy saving all the, ethnic slave children. I do think that is dated, and there are plenty of parts of the film which, you watch now and like, yeah, that's not the best. And I'm not saying I agree with all of that whatsoever. I'm not saying I do. But I can't lie when I say that I find this film so goddamn enjoyable. I really do. I love the character of Mola and the villain. I was obsessed with that villain growing up. I loved it. There's so many moments, so many aspects of the film, should I say, that I was obsessed with growing up. I really loved the Mola villain because he's so threatening. He doesn't really say many lines of dialogue, at least off the top of my head, that's what I think. So, you know, he doesn't really say many lines of dialogue in the film, but every single time you see the Mola man's face, he just looks so evil and so threatening. There's this dominance with that character. And he may be my favourite villain in the Indiana Jones franchise. I think all the villains, and even that even includes Kate Blanchett's villain from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I think all the villains in all the Indiana Jones, in the Indiana Jones franchise so far have all been really, really good. But this might be my favourite Indiana Jones villain. I think they've all been at least good, but this might be my favourite, just because he doesn't say much, but it's that whole thing, show, don't tell. Whenever you look at the Mola man, you feel that he's saying about 1,000 things with his face, but you don't really know what, and at the same time, no, you're not sure if you want to know what. And, you know, that character shouldn't work either. He's introduced, you know, what, about an hour into the film, kind of like Count Dooku in Attack of the Clones, which is one of the reasons Attack of the Clones really annoys me, because we don't actually find out who the villain is for such a long time, and then we do find out who he is. He's played by Christopher Lee, and I'm like, why have you wasted Christopher Lee up to this point? But the thing is, at Temple of Doom, though, they make it work, because the film's such a roller coaster up to that point that by the time you get to the Mola Ram, you're like, oh, this is what we've been waiting for. Now let's see what we've got in store. Oh, he's a villain who shouldn't be messed with. And also, I love how all the temple sequences are so atmospheric and so... it just feels so dark, and I love how Spielberg creates tension in those sequences. Watching them again, I'm like, wow, Spielberg knows how to do this sort of stuff. There's a reason he's often regarded as one of the best directors of all time, particularly by me. And also, like I've already mentioned, I love many of the action sequences of the film. I love all the stunts as well. You know, there's one thing I didn't really talk about in my podcast on Raiders Lost Ark. I really love the stunt in, well, I was about to say all 4 Indiana Jones films. No, just the first 3. The stunts in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I don't think are that great, but again, I'll talk about it when I talk about Crystal Skull in a separate podcast. But I do love all the practicality of all the stunts in the first 3 Indiana Jones movies. I think you get that a lot in Raiders, particularly when, you know, Indy's going under the truck and he's holding onto that rope. That's such an iconic scene, and there's a reason for that. And I also love the practicality of the stunts in this movie as well. You know, when you see Indy having that fight with that big, tough Tuggy warrior, who is also played by the same guy who played the big tough Nazi who Indy fights with in the next to the airplane and Raiders, in that iconic fight scene. And I love the practicality of that. I love how real it feels. I love how whenever Indy gets punched in any Indiana Jones films, but also in this one in particular, you feel like you got punched with him. I love how you feel like you get dirty within this film once again. I love how dirty and gritty he gets as well. You know, gets his shirt ripped in half, and you just in his costume design, you feel how gritty the film is as well. I just love the stunts and the action sequences, and even though some of the action sequences aren't as well shot as Raiders, like the bridge sequence towards the end, the shots don't completely align with one another. Like, when you see the bridge from a wide angle, the river underneath it doesn't look that wide, but then when you see the river underneath it in a closer, whenever a Tuggy warrior is falling down into the river, it looks quite wide. And also, whenever you see a Tuggy warrior fall into the river, and they're apparently eaten by crocodiles, you know, towards the end of the film, the shots don't completely align. And I'm not saying I wanted the Tuggy Wars to actually... I'm not saying I wanted to see the Tuggy Wars, you know, eaten by the crocodiles bit by bit. I'm not saying that, but some of the shots don't align. And also, I think the fight sequence in Club Obi-Wan, a little reference there, yes, the club at the start of Temple of Doom is called Club Obi-Wan, so that's a reference to Star Wars, obviously. I do think the fight sequence in the club at the start of the movie is a bit ropey, and I think the film only really starts to get going. I mean, I think it gets going from the offset, actually, with the whole musical number. It's so fantastic. But I think the action of the film really starts to get going with the car chase in Shanghai. But at the same time, though, there is some action sequences in the film which I do think aren't directed to the best of Spielberg's abilities, and, you know, the film definitely has problems. It does. I'm not going to sit and say it doesn't. And if I wasn't a huge Indiana Jones fan, if I didn't grow up watching these films, maybe I would view Temple of Doom a lot differently. In fact, you know what? I definitely would. I definitely would view Temple of Doom a lot differently. I'm not going to beat around the bush on that. But I grew up watching these films. You know, there's a reason I'm such a huge Indiana Jones fan. There's a reason I've a reason. There's a reason I've got a pop of Indy from the end of Temple of Doom down there, Funko Pop of him from this film. There's a reason I still watch this movie nowadays. There's a reason I've seen it about 90 times, and that is because it's still so entertaining, and I still don't get bored of it. Even in the stuff with all the, that kind of speak, even in the middle of the film and all that stuff, when Indy's getting possessed and Shoudln't becomes a slave and Willie is getting sacrificed, even with all that stuff, I'm still so engaged in it though. I'm still so engrossed in what's going on. I'm still invested in all of it, and I just love it because it still feels like a Indiana Jones movie, even though it's so different than Raiders of the Lost Ark, and also because there's a sense of joy in there, and there's a sense of adventure. It's so different than Raiders, and because I love this movie growing up. That's why it's my second favourite Indiana Jones film. I'm not going to talk at length about this point, because I spoke a lot about why, Raiders is my third favourite Indiana Jones movie in my podcast of Raiders, and why Last Crusade is my favourite, and why Temple of Doom is my second favourite in my last podcast. But Temple, I'm going to mention a bit again here, because obviously, if you didn't watch that one and you wanted to hear me talk about Temple of Doom, I'm going to talk about it, about why it's my second favourite Indiana Jones movie. I've kind of all gone through that, actually. I was about to give all these reasons, but now I'll just be repeating myself. It's my second favourite Indiana Jones movie, for all those reasons that I mentioned already in this podcast, but also more noteworthy is perhaps the fact that I grew up loving this film, and I didn't grow up loving Raiders though. I really loved this film growing up. It's really the film that got me into the Indiana Jones franchise. Without this film, if I didn't see this film, I don't know if I'd love Last Crusade the same way. And I don't know if I'd be this excited for Indy 5 next week, you know what I mean? I don't think I would love the Indiana Jones franchise if it wasn't for this film, because it showed me what an adventure movie could be. I mean, Raiders sort of did that, but it didn't when I grew up. It didn't. This one really captured me when I was a kid. I was captivated by it. I don't really know why. I wish I could go back to my 5-year-old self, my 6-year-old self. Whenever I saw this movie, I can't remember now. But I wish I went back to my younger self watching this film for the first time, and I wish I asked him a couple of questions at the end. Why did this one work for you, but Raiders didn't? But I just don't know why though. Looking back on it, I just really don't know why this one worked for me when I was a kid, why this one worked for me and why Raiders didn't work for me. Now I love all three Indiana Jones. I love all of the first three Indiana Jones films, but I didn't growing up. My phone's gone off at the side here. I'm just going to throw it on the ground because it's annoying me. I can hear it keep going off. But anyway, yes. Growing up, I didn't love Raiders, and I do love Raiders now, and I love all of the first three Indiana Jones movies. But because I loved this film growing up, it holds more of a special place in my heart. No pun intended there. So yeah, that's kind of the way it is with me in the Indiana Jones franchise. It's also the way it is with me in the Star Wars franchise in a way. Because I grew up loving Return of the Jedi and Empire Strikes Back, and I didn't grow up loving A New Hope. I love it now, but I didn't love it when I was younger. And so, these films are so nostalgic for me, and they bring back so many great memories. Whenever I rewatch Temple of Doom, I feel like I'm that kid again, experiencing for the first time, experiencing what really cinema could be. I never really felt this excited by a movie growing up until I watched Temple of Doom, you know what I mean? I didn't really feel that excited by any movie, and then I watched Temple of Doom, I was like, wow, I've never seen anything like this, and I don't think I ever will, and I still don't think I ever will. I think for many reasons, and to be honest, many good reasons now, and I do think this is very much an anomaly of a film. It wouldn't ever be made again, and I think it was made under certain circumstances that it wouldn't have been made 10 years later. I don't think Spielberg would have made this film 10 years later. I don't think he would have made it 20 years later. I also don't think he would have made it 10 years earlier. I think they made this at a certain point in time that is so fixed there, and it's such an example. I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's such an exemplification. This is what I'm trying to say. It's such an exemplification of Spielberg and Lucas in 1984 that you really couldn't predict. It's so strange. It's a movie that really shouldn't have happened, and you watch it and you go, why did it happen, almost in a way? But you also can't help but love it. At least I can't help but love it. And the reason I love it is because It is a tightly paced, breathtaking, thrilling rollercoaster ride of an adventure from start to finish. The musical sequence at the beginning, just brilliant. It's just brilliant, and it makes you want to see a Spielberg musical. And for a long while, we didn't get that. We only got the first Spielberg directed musical 2 years ago with West Side Story, and yet this film came out in 1984. It's like Spielberg just showing how he could direct a musical in the opening sequence, which just captures you, and then the film goes on, and it's like one big roller coaster ride, and yet at the same time though, it just works. And I watched this film with my mom, who hadn't seen it in a very long time. Perhaps she hadn't seen it since it initially came out in 1984. And when she rewatched it with me about a week and a half ago, we finished it and she was like, it was one big romp. It's one big romp. And that's exactly what it is. It's one big romp. And I'm not going to sit here and say it's a perfect movie. I don't think it is. I don't think it's on the same level movie-wise as Last Crusade or Raiders, but personally for me, I have this great affection for this film because, it was a movie which really captured my heart. Again, no pun intended there, because someone's heart quite literally gets taken out of the body, in this movie, but it's the truth. It captured my heart growing up, and the characters I loved as well. Well, I loved Indy and Shoudln't from this movie onwards, and the John Williams score, and just so many moments, like the moments in the film when, you think Indy is gone for good. You think he's been completely, completely possessed, and then just before he's about to sacrifice Willie, Shoudln't is trying to whack him out of his possession, and you think that Indy's gone for good, and then he grabs Shoudln't and brings him in to him and goes, "I'm alright, kid." That's one of my favourite lines in cinema. I've just got goosebumps saying that line out now. I love that line so much. And then you have that moment shortly after where Indy is standing there in the mines, ready to save all the slave children and get a John Williams score, ba-da-da-dum-bum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-da-ba-da. You have that playing in the background in that moment, and just, oh my god, it's so entertaining. It still holds up for me as well. I know it's dated and some of its themes and ideas. I know that I do. I understand that. But it doesn't change the fact that I've seen this movie 90 times and I still don't get bored of it. I still love it. It's so exciting still. And yeah, I want to rewatch this movie every year. It's a summer movie for me. I mean, all the Indiana Jones movies are, really. I watch them every summer. And this movie, though, whenever I watch it, it really feels like summer. There's a sense of comfort in this film as well, which I know sounds odd because Temple of Doom is ruthless and it's really dark in some parts, but it's also a bit of a comfort movie for me. When I watch it, I feel like everything's okay. Same with the way I do about Last Crusade, and I talk about that in more detail when I talk about Last Crusade in a future podcast. But for now, talking about Temple of Doom, I love it. I really do. And also, one of the things I really love about the movie, it's got a cameo from Dan Aykroyd. Dan Aykroyd of Ghostbusters and Blues Brothers fame. He has a cameo in this film as a guy that's talking to Indy and his partners, Willie and Shoudln't, as they're about to get on the plane in Shanghai. That's him. That's Dan Aykroyd. And I love the fact that he's in this movie because it's just such an odd bit of trivia. And you're watching it going, wait, what, why is he in this film? But at the same time, though, it just all works. It's one big anomaly of a film where anything goes. And because anything quite literally goes, you can't help but be swung along by this roller coaster of adventure and be invested and engaged in what's going on through Spielberg's direction. And because of you're watching Indiana on another adventure, and he's got that sense of adventure, that sense of joy, the John Williams musical score, and the characters Shoudln't, enhanced performances, Indy, and in just so many more memorable elements. You have the villain in the Mola, you have the minecart chase sequence, you have Indy saving all the slaves, all the children, you have all that going on, and the final scene of the film when all the children are reunited with their family, the deserted village, just brings a huge smile to your face. It's so good. I've gone on and on about it, and you can tell how much I love it. Even though it is a bit dated, I understand that, you know, but I just love it to pieces still. Because it's so damn entertaining. It's so wildly entertaining. And like what he said, you know, it's a tightly paced, breathtaking, thrilling roller coaster ride on adventure from start to finish. That still works for me nowadays, and that I absolutely adore. And I understand it's not a great movie, and I understand why a lot of people wouldn't like it. Personally, for me, it is a great movie. And objectively, it's not a great movie, but personally, subjectively, it is a great movie. And it's not just a great movie, actually, it's an amazing movie. And I know it shouldn't work, but for me, I love it to pieces. I really, really do. And yeah, anything goes in this Indiana Jones sequel, and that's why it works. That's why it works. And so, all in all, my updated rating, and by the way, I don't actually know if it's an updated rating or not because I don't remember the rating I gave to Temple of Doom about a year ago now, but all in all, my updated rating, my quote-unquote updated rating on Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is a 9.3 out of 10. Yeah, that's what I'd give it now, a 9.3 out of 10. It's not a perfect movie by any means for me, but it's close to perfect. Well, it isn't, but at the same time, though, it is because it just means so much to me. I can't explain it. It's a movie I grew up loving and I still love now, and that holds such a special place in my heart, and that I just can't get over how it happened. It's an anomaly of a film, and that's perhaps why I love it even more as well. Love, 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 love it. And that's about all I have to say about Temple of Doom. Other than that, I'm going to say one more time that it's a 9.3. That I'm going to say actually that Temple of Doom, I'm just saying the name of it once more, that Temple of Doom is a 9.3 out of 10 from me. Anyway, guys, that is it for this podcast for today. Thank you, as always, for watching or listening. And if you enjoyed hearing my thoughts, or listening to my thoughts, or whatever, the same thing, actually, hearing or listening. But if you enjoyed hearing and perhaps watching me talk about my thoughts on Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom, then let me know your thoughts on Temple of Doom in the comment section below as well. Maybe you love the movie, maybe you hate it. Whatever your thoughts are, let me know in the comment section below. And also look forward to my next podcast on Indiana Jones, which will be in the next couple of days, which will be me talking about why Last Crusade is my favourite film of all time, or why it might be my favourite film of all time. But until then, guys, as I've already mentioned, thank you as always for watching and listening. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this podcast. I look forward to many more podcasts coming very, very soon on this channel. Thank you as always for watching and listening, and I will see you guys again soon. But bye for now. Bye.